Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 12 of What If I Was Reborn in Attack on Titan as a civilian nobody with the gamer system. Let the tale begin. Chapter 222. When Locke returned from the bay, the headquarters was already busy with preparations for departure. Petra moved between offices, passing reports, while Emer sorted supply documents. The smell of ink, metal, and dried paper filled the room. Every desk was covered with maps, formation plans, and civilian registration lists. Just as Locke entered, Dana Fritz appeared at the doorway, boots still covered with traces of salt and sand. "You're back," Locke said, his tone steady, not surprised at all. The timing was exactly as they had planned. "I've cleared everything within 30 kilometers, Dana replied, brushing her hair behind her ear. "All wandering Titans are gone. I kept a few nearby and fixed them at the seabed. If Marley sends warships, they won't return." She stated it lightly, but Petra heard the steel under her voice. There was no softness in the way Dana spoke about using Titans. It was decisiveness born from survival, from being part of the Restorationists, from losing her family and future once already. After Grisha's disappearance, Dana had stopped hiding that side of herself. Petra's eyes narrowed slightly. This woman is not gentle. She is dangerous. Emer sensed it too. The air around Dana carried a quiet authority, not the kind born from command, but from something older: survival, bloodline, purpose. Locke nodded. "Good. You've done well. Do you want to see Aaron and the others before we leave?" Dana snorted. "Dear Captain, I'm not a tool." "So you're not going?" Locke asked calmly. Petra cut in before Dana could answer. "Ronan, I haven't visited Aaron and Mikasa in a long time. Let's go together." Emer raised a hand lazily. "I'm coming too. If I stay in this office one more minute, I'll turn into furniture." Locke smiled. "Then tonight, we go together." Hey, hey. Dana protested. "You all just decided that without my opinion? Are you going?" Petra asked sweetly. Dana's mouth twitched. She felt the provocation clearly. "I'll go." But Locke noticed the tension at the edge of her expression. For all her confidence, Dana Fritz was nervous. Not about Titans. Not about wars. About family. By evening, they arrived at Aaron's house. The gate creaked open, and 3 small figures in the yard turned instantly. "Locke! Locke, you're back. You're really back. Next time, I'm going with you." They rushed toward him, Aaron with burning eyes, Armin with shining curiosity, and Mikasa with quiet intensity. Locke laughed helplessly. "One at a time. Let's go inside first." They grabbed his sleeves and pulled, leaving Petra, Emer, and Dana standing outside. "Feels like we're invisible," Emer muttered. Petra sighed. "It's always like this." Dana inhaled deeply and followed, steps careful, almost timid. For all her pride, she did not know how to face this house, these children, this woman who had once shared a husband with her. Inside, Carla greeted them warmly. Her smile faded only for a heartbeat when she saw Dana, then she stepped forward on her own initiative. "Welcome," Carla said. "Come sit." Dana exhaled. Her shoulders loosened. She sat. Locke barely had time to stand before Uncle Harry slammed a hand on his shoulder and forced him back down. "Locke!" Harry boomed. His voice could shatter wine bottles. "Is it true? You're taking people outside the walls?" "About 100,000, Locke replied casually. Petra nearly dropped the cup she was holding. Emer paused halfway through a sip of tea. Dana's eyebrows twitched. Aaron and Armin immediately lit up. "Take us." "I want to go too." "Let us join, we're ready." But it wasn't Locke who answered them. Mikasa stepped forward, placed herself between them, and spoke coldly. "No." "Why not?" Aaron protested. "It's unsafe." Her voice was quiet, but unshakable. Aaron froze. He respected her strength, he feared it a little, too. Armin shrank back beside him. Locke simply watched with amusement. Then he turned toward Uncle Harry and Aunt Martha, who were tense with worry. This migration is not like Shiganshina, Locke explained. They won't be used as bait. They won't be fighting. They will farm, build houses, and grow a future. So there will be no casualties? Harry asked. No, Locke said, tone unwavering. We'll build a safe road. Anyone who wants to see the outside world will be able to go. Harry blinked. You mean you want to eliminate all Titans? Locke shook his head. Why eliminate them? The room fell silent. None of them knew the truth. Titans were a resource. Weapons. Tools. And once Dana mastered her control, they would build with Titans. Why kill power? Harry didn't understand, and Locke didn't explain. The topic shifted naturally when Carla and Dana returned from the kitchen with hot dishes, and soon the house filled with warmth, steam, light, laughter, voices. For a moment, they were simply a family. Dinner lasted long, but eventually Locke stood from the table. Tomorrow, he said, we begin the migration. Aaron jumped up. Take me with you. No, Mikasa answered instantly. I didn't ask you. But I'm right. Aaron deflated. Armin swallowed. Will we ever get to go? Locke rested a hand gently on his head. When the road is ready, he said. When it's safe. Then yes. You will see the ocean. Armin's eyes sparkled. Mikasa looked away, hiding relief. Aaron clenched a fist, determination burning. They walked back through the dark streets later. Houses glowed, windows warm. The night smelled of wood smoke, salt, and wind. Petra hugged her coat around her. They were happy to see you. Locke nodded. Dana walked a little behind, silent. When Petra slowed her steps, Dana spoke quietly. They accept me. They do, Petra replied. People here are simple. Kind. They just want honesty. Dana laughed once, bitterly. I have been many things. Honest was never one of them. Petra's eyes softened. But here, she said, you can start again. Dana looked ahead at Locke's back, tall, steady, unyielding. I hope so, she whispered. Night deepened. Lanterns swung. The wind coming from the north was cold. Petra watched Locke from the corner of her eye. You really trust Dana? She asked. I trust her goals, Locke answered. For now, they align with ours. That's enough. And if they don't? Locke didn't hesitate. Then I'll kill her. His voice was calm. Like stating the weather. Petra shivered. Emer sighed. You're terrifying. Locke said nothing. He simply kept walking, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Because tomorrow they would lead 100,000 people outside the walls. And the first road to the sea would open. Chapter 223. Everyone carried their own thoughts as the dinner gradually came to an end, yet the atmosphere remained warm and restrained, as if something momentous was quietly fermenting beneath the surface. Aaron still had not given up on his plan to go beyond the walls. Armin, who had barely touched his food, wore an absent-minded expression, his gaze drifting repeatedly toward the window, as if the stone walls beyond it could no longer contain his curiosity. Compared to Aaron's blunt determination, Armin's desire was tangled with hesitation and fear. He longed for the outside world, yet his instincts constantly warned him of danger. Locke noticed this immediately. He did not comment, but a trace of concern surfaced in his heart. With his arrival in this world, many of the tragedies that once forged Armin into who he would become had never occurred. Whether the boy could still grow into the strategist history would remember was no longer certain. Perhaps, that was not necessarily a bad thing. If Armin ultimately chose a quieter life within the walls, Locke would not stop him. Some people were meant to change the world, while others deserved to live peacefully within it. Either choice was valid. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, a full week had gone by. The final statistics regarding voluntary migration to the northern bay stunned even Locke himself. The number of applicants exceeded all expectations. Nearly 120,000 people had registered, a full 20,000 more than originally projected. Reality, however, quickly forced adjustments. The northern bay was not a paradise. It was a frontier. After internal deliberation, strict screening standards were implemented. Those of advanced age were excluded. Children, on the other hand, were allowed, provided their guardians accompanied them. What Locke needed were young, strong laborers, people capable of reclaiming land, constructing infrastructure, and surviving the hardships of early settlement. This was not a sightseeing tour. It was the foundation of a future stronghold. Naturally, the question of those left behind could not be ignored. Families whose adult members migrated would receive government support. Children would be enrolled in public schools free of charge, with food and lodging fully covered. The elderly would be relocated to centralized care facilities in the inner districts, ensuring stable living conditions. The financial burden was immense. Zachary voiced his concerns more than once, his frustration evident during every meeting. Yet each time, Locke calmly dismantled his arguments. The people inside the walls are not difficult to win over, Locke said plainly. They don't demand ideals or glory. They want stability, safety, a future for their children. Give them that, and they would become the most reliable foundation of the state. Once settled, the Bay region would quickly reach self-sufficiency. Farmland would expand. Livestock would multiply. Trade, once open to the outside world, would inevitably follow. The pioneers would endure hardship first, but they would also reap the greatest rewards. Several more days passed. After multiple rounds of screening, the final number of migrants stabilized at 70,000. They were scattered across all regions within the walls and had begun converging toward the breach area near Wall Maria. Alongside them came staggering quantities of supplies, tools, seed grain, livestock, construction materials, escorted by a massive military presence. This was not merely an expedition. It was the largest organized civilian migration in the history of Paradis Island. A turning point that would be etched permanently into the island's future. During this intense period of preparation, Erwin finally returned from outside the walls, bringing with him several dozen individuals. They were volunteers. At their head stood a dark-skinned young man with sharp eyes and a rigid posture, clearly a soldier by training. "I am Anyankapon," he said after saluting properly. "Former technical officer of Marley's Armored Corps. Second lieutenant. I served as Yelena's deputy." His gaze lingered briefly on Locke before he smiled faintly. "You must be Captain Locke." Just as Yelena described, young, but commanding. Locke stepped forward and clasped his hand firmly. "Welcome to Paradis Island." Anyankapon's expression hardened as he spoke again, hatred burning unmistakably in his eyes. "With your help, our vengeance against Marley is no longer an illusion. One day, they will pay for everything they've done." Behind him, the other volunteers mirrored his resolve. Locke nodded slowly. "That day will come." He paused, then added honestly, "I should host a proper reception, but I will soon be leading the migration north. I hope you'll understand." Anyankapon shook his head at once. "It's an honor that you received us personally. Leave the harbor design to us. We brought the best engineers and builders we have." His humility was no accident. Before departing Marley, Yelena had personally warned them, never underestimate Locke. Zeke himself had spoken at length about Locke's decisiveness, foresight, and terrifying ability to mobilize power. A man capable of earning Zeke's respect was not someone to offend lightly. Moreover, their revenge against Marley depended entirely on Paradis Island's rise. Without Locke, there would be no foothold, no leverage, no future. The cooperation between both sides was not optional, it was survival. Understanding the meaning behind Anyankapon's words, Locke accepted without false modesty. Then I'll leave it to you. Anyankapon smiled. We must act quickly. Marley's technological progress hasn't stopped. If we want to compete without relying solely on Titans, our equipment must keep pace. Locke was pleased to hear that. With a brief exchange of glances, Zachary and Erwin began dividing responsibilities. Some volunteers were sent to Hang immediately to assist with industrial research, while Locke personally selected the harbor designers, engineers, and surveyors who would accompany him north. Among them was Anyankapon himself. As the preparations reached their final stage, the direction of Parody Island's future was no longer uncertain. The walls were no longer the end of the world. They were merely the beginning. Chapter 224. With Anyankapon and the others arriving safely, the final piece of the northern expansion was finally in place. Locke did not linger in the inland regions. After only brief coordination, he directly led the bulk of the Survey Corps, along with the entire Corps headquarters, toward the northern edge of Wall Maria. Along the way, Anyankapon and the other volunteers gained a far more concrete understanding of Parody Island than anything Yelena's descriptions could provide. Seeing it with their own eyes overturned many long-held impressions. This was not a devil's island. Nor were its people monsters. They were ordinary civilians, farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, living ordinary lives. The only difference between them and the people beyond the sea was the blood of Eldia flowing in their veins. Like anyone else, they desired peace, stability, and a future worth believing in. But in this world, desire alone was meaningless. If a nation wished to survive, if it wished to live well, it needed strength. On that front, Parody Island possessed advantages impossible to ignore. Though its technology still lagged far behind Marley's, it held the founding Titan, a deterrent unmatched by any conventional military force. Its land was rich in resources, its political power centralized, and its people, having endured generations of oppression, were unusually resilient and disciplined. Most importantly, its geographical position was ideal. Parody lay close to the Marleyan mainland. Unlike other nations that required vast logistical chains to wage war, any future conflict could be brought directly to Marley's doorstep. For the volunteer organization, whose sole purpose was revenge against Marley, this made Parody Island an invaluable ally. As a result, communication between Locke and Anyankapon proceeded smoothly, with little friction. When they reached the northernmost district of Wall Maria, Anyankapon was visibly shaken by what he saw. The sheer number of people gathered there was overwhelming. Captain Locke, Anyankapon said slowly, disbelief evident in his voice, you intend to bring this many people to the northern bay? Locke's expression remained calm. Yes, he replied evenly. The bay will become the core development zone of Parody Island. From there, we will secure the entire northern coastline and establish a coastal region for trade and communication with the outside world. After a brief pause, he continued. Rapid development requires manpower. That is non-negotiable. These people are necessary, and every one of them volunteered. Anyankapon exhaled quietly, his admiration no longer hidden. I understand. You thought this through thoroughly. In truth, he had misunderstood something. This was not merely a sacrifice. It was conviction. Locke shifted his attention to the women standing nearby, who had remained silent throughout the discussion. How are the preparations? He asked. Petra responded immediately. Everything is in place. 3,500 soldiers will escort the migration. Nearly 70,000 civilians are moving with us. Supplies are sufficient for at least half a year. President Zachary has arranged reserves, and if necessary, additional resources can be requisitioned from within the walls. She hesitated briefly, then added with concern. All of this depends on one thing, whether we can establish and maintain a safe route to the bay. Dina should be able to manage that, correct? At that moment, Anyankapon spoke up cautiously. Dina, is she the holder of the founding Titan? Locke did not hide the truth. Yes. Her power is essential. With her current level of control, safety will not be an issue. She will also oversee the long-term security of the route. Petra nodded. No objections. Historia and Emer also voiced their agreement. At this point, both had become indispensable assistants, sharing much of Petra's workload. Without them, managing an operation of this scale would have been impossible. They were exhausted, but resolute. Every decision they made now would shape the future of Parody Island. They had no choice but to be cautious. Onyankopon could not help but praise them. Very reliable, he said sincerely. His gaze lingered briefly on Historia, drawn by her gentle presence and striking beauty. Even though she had not fully matured, her calm demeanor left a strong impression. But Onyankopon quickly reined himself in. These women were clearly close to Locke. Whatever thoughts crossed his mind, he crushed them instantly. Revenge against Marley came first, everything else was irrelevant. Locke noticed the glance but chose not to comment. A glance was meaningless. But if Onyankopon ever crossed a line, Locke would ensure he understood the definition of hospitality on Parody Island. Without speeches or ceremony, Locke mounted his horse and rode to the front of the formation. Dina Fritz followed closely behind him, while Petra, Historia, and Emer remained in the central carriages, overseeing logistics. Under Locke's command, the massive column began to move. Step by step, the gates of Wall Maria opened. Beyond them lay land unprotected by stone. On both sides of the road, civilians gathered in silence, watching the soldiers and volunteers pass. Their expressions were complex: admiration, fear, envy, regret, hope. Some watched with longing. Others with doubts. Some with quiet relief that it was not them walking beyond the walls. At last, the final ranks passed through the gate. The enormous stone doors slowly descended, sealing the city once more. On the other side of the wall, Parody Island's future had already begun to move forward. Chapter 225. The moment the pure Titan lurched toward the convoy, only to abruptly turn and flee in the opposite direction, Onyankopon's eyes narrowed in shock. So this is the founding Titan's power, incredible. His gaze slid toward the surrounding Survey Corps soldiers, men and women who stood tall, disciplined, and unshaken even before a Titan. If before he viewed the people of Parody as simple island dwellers, then now, they were something else entirely. A hidden force. A nation with terrifying potential. Having served in Marley's military, Onyankopon understood very well what pure Titans truly represented. To see them respond like trained hounds, repelled with a single influence, struck him to the core. A technologically backward island, but with unmatched strategic power. If Parody Island ever reached true mastery of the founding Titan, or worse, if Locke were pushed into a desperate corner and forced to unleash a forbidden command, the consequences would shake the entire world. A single order could drown continents and Titans. For the first time, Onyankopon looked at Locke not as a young commander, but as a world-shaping threat. And at the same time, as the only possible ally who could help the volunteers avenge Marley's atrocities. This is the ally we needed, Onyankopon realized. This is the only path toward justice. Locke knew nothing of Onyankopon's shifting thoughts. Riding at the front, he was fully focused on the long-term plan, finalizing the placement of post stations, lookout towers, and defensive barracks along the northern route. 5 days on horseback, nearly half a month on foot. Locke murmured to Petra, Historia, and Emer, all of whom rode beside him with a large, detailed map spread across their saddles. Supply and safety determine everything. Once those two are stable, the northern road becomes permanent. The girls marked terrain, water sources, cliffs, and river bends as Locke spoke. After the civilians are settled at the bay, Locke continued, we begin road construction immediately. And thus, the great northward march continued. With nearly 70,000 civilians and 3,500 soldiers, the pace was painfully slow. What was once a 5-day journey stretched to more than half a month. But eventually, the shimmering blue horizon appeared. And then? Is that the sea? Blue water, what does it taste like? You can drink it after you drink it, go on. Are you insane? A wave of awe swept through the civilians. Even many Survey Corps soldiers, hardened by years of training, felt their breath catch at the vast, endless ocean stretching before them. The Bay Area, once quiet, empty, and desolate, was now exploding with life. The entire coastline filled with tents, workers, wagons, and supply caravans moving in every direction. Thanks to Dana Fritz, every Titan within 50 kilometers had already been driven away. The soldiers assigned settlements along the ridges and cliffs, careful to avoid areas vulnerable to storm tides or natural disasters. And with nearly 70,000 laborers, plus the technical leadership of Onyankapan and the other volunteers, construction exploded forward at an unprecedented rate. Locke's days were packed with military planning, oversight, and security coordination. But with Petra, Emer, and Historia handling a mountain of administrative tasks, Locke found himself unexpectedly free. This earned him 3 pairs of increasingly irritated eyes, especially whenever they saw him riding off with Dana Fritz. Petra and Emer were visibly annoyed. Historia was too gentle to complain, but the discomfort in her eyes was obvious. But Locke was not traveling with Dana for leisure, he was preparing defenses. For days, the two of them surveyed the region, driving Titans into a valley 30 kilometers west of the bay. By the time their operation was complete, 167 pure Titans were contained in the valley. Another 45 Titans rested dormant beneath the seabed, waiting to ambush any Marleyan warships that dared to approach. Dana wiped the sweat from her forehead. These will be useful when Marley retaliates. Locke nodded. With your current control, managing 100 Titans at once is stable enough. As your mastery improves, we expand the perimeter. Dana's eyes flickered with both pressure and pride. She knew Locke's expectations were enormous. And she also knew that failure was not an option. Meanwhile, in the bay, the development continued at explosive speed. The cliffs shielded the settlements from winds, natural stone ridges provided defensive positions, and the vast harbor could eventually accommodate warships and trade vessels. The new world outside the walls, the true beginning of Parody Island's expansion, had officially taken shape. And for Locke, this was only the start. The North will become our stronghold, our gateway to the world. He looked toward the open sea, its endless blue surface reflecting the future he intended to seize. And Marley will come. When they do, we'll be ready. Chapter 226. The wind from the sea swept across the cliffside, carrying with it the scent of salt and distant storms. Below, the vast construction site of the northern base spread across the shoreline, rows of temporary wooden structures, organized supply depots, stone foundations, and watchtower frames rising like skeletal silhouettes. Workers moved like steady streams of ants, hauling lumber, driving stakes, digging trenches, and shaping the first true port Parody Island had ever attempted to build. Standing near the cliff's edge, Locke watched it all in silence, arms folded, hair shifting slightly in the breeze. Footsteps approached from behind. Erwin, who had just finished inspecting the newly raised coastal defenses, exhaled deeply. His eyes, reflecting the sweeping vista of the ocean and the relentless movement of the people below, filled with satisfaction and something warmer. The development here is remarkable, Erwin said, unable to conceal the emotion in his voice. We've finally reached the point where this land is no longer just theory on an old map. If this continues, I believe our first seaport will be completed far sooner than expected. When that day comes. He paused, looking at Locke. Parody will enter a new era. A true turning point. Locke smiled faintly, not deflecting the praise but not basking in it either. This isn't my achievement alone, he replied. Without your backing, I'd probably still be a squad leader right now, or on trial in front of a military court. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth. Locke remembered clearly how everything could have gone wrong, the political traps, the covert factions, the remnants of the royal government, and the heavy suspicion surrounding his meteoric rise. Without Erwin's decisiveness and Zachary's support, he would have been crushed long before reaching this point. Erwin didn't respond immediately. He simply watched Locke, this young commander barely 17, whose actions had reshaped the future of Parody Island in less than 2 years. From the moment Erwin inherited the power of the Card Titan, he had known his remaining lifespan. 13 years, no more, no less. Every passing day carried weight. Every choice mattered. The knowledge that he wouldn't live to see Parody fully flourish had settled into him like a heavy stone. But seeing Locke here, with all his impossible potential and unwavering drive, Erwin felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Hope. After a moment, Erwin shifted the conversation. The island's development is progressing, he said, voice turning firm. But we're far from secure. Marley will discover this construction eventually. The bay will become a target, and we have to prepare. Locke nodded, his expression sharpening. I'm aware. That's why this time, I want to take the initiative. Erwin's brows knotted. Take the initiative? What exactly do you mean? Locke didn't hesitate. Onyankopon briefed me on Kenny's situation on the Marley mainland. It's not just valuable intelligence, it's an opportunity. Erwin's eyes widened. You intend to go yourself? It wasn't a question. It was a grim realization. Locke didn't deny it. This is the best moment to infiltrate Marley, he said calmly. Kenny has already stabilized his position there, and with the chaos caused by the war with the Mideast Alliance, Marley's internal defenses are stretched thin. Erwin's reaction was immediate and vehement. Absolutely not. Locke turned to look at him, surprised by the intensity in his tone. Erwin continued, voice low but unwavering. You've become the spine of Parody. Your existence alone prevents this island from collapsing into fear and factional struggle. If anyone must lead an infiltration operation in Marley, it should be me. The words struck deeper than Locke expected. There was no political calculation behind them, only conviction. And concern. Locke sighed. If Parody is going to move forward at this pace, someone has to make decisions without relying on the founding Titan or Titan powers. You and Zachary are essential for that. If either of you leaves or falls, this whole structure collapses. Erwin shook his head. And you think you are replaceable? Locke didn't answer. He stared out toward the bright blue line where the ocean met the sky. Marley won't leave us alone, he eventually said. If we simply wait for the storm to hit us, we'll never have the breathing room we need. We must understand Marley from the inside, its politics, its factions, its weaknesses. No one is better suited for that role than someone with knowledge of their world. Erwin's face tightened. Even so, sending you. Locke cut him off gently. It has to be me. Erwin clenched his jaw. Then at least let me choose the team that goes with you. Locke nodded, willing to concede this much. 2 months later. Time flowed like the tides. The construction of the Bay Area entered its final phase, stone breakwaters rose above the waves, new docks stretched into the sea, and storehouses lined the cliffs. Onyankopon and the volunteer engineers worked tirelessly, coordinating thousands of laborers. Parody Island's first modern port was truly taking shape. Meanwhile, Dina Fritz's mastery over the founding Titan grew rapidly. Each week her control became more stable, clearer, sharper. She no longer simply repelled wandering Titans, she positioned them strategically, ensuring no Titan approached within 50 kilometers of the bay. Even the inland road was secure. Dozens of newly built post stations, watchtowers, and military barracks dotted the long route from Wal Maria to the coast. Mounted patrols rode continuously, and new recruits were being trained to maintain the route's security. Parody Island was changing, swiftly and irreversibly. During this period, Emer and Historia took on increasing responsibilities alongside Petra, managing logistics, civilian arrangements, and communications. Locke assigned the three of them the heaviest administrative burden, and they handled it admirably, though not without frustration. Especially when they noticed Locke frequently leaving the bay to conduct operations with Dina. Their dissatisfaction simmered just beneath the surface. But Locke wasn't sightseeing. He and Dina spent days rounding up and relocating Titans, forming a massive reserve force hidden west of the bay. Over 167 Titans now remain there, plus 45 more concealed in the shallow sea. This would be Parody Island's first real line of defense against Marley. And Dina was improving fast, though she could still only coordinate around 100 Titans at once. Beyond that, the commands became scattered and unstable. But Locke wasn't worried. Her strength was growing. Time was on their side. And soon, Locke would make his next move. One that would shake both Parody and Marley. Chapter 227. The moment the northern gates of Walrose swung open, the entire street erupted into chaotic whispers. Wait, are they really opening the gate? Isn't the outside crawling with Titans? Did the garrison lose their minds? If a Titan charges in right now, we're dead. I don't think they would open the gate if that were possible. They must have a plan. Hey, look! The soldiers are posting something on the wall. Go, go! Let's see what it says. A tide of people surged toward the notice board. Even before they reached it, the atmosphere shifted, fear, curiosity, and disbelief all tangled together. The soldiers who posted the notice behaved as if nothing unusual had happened. Without acknowledging the crowd, they calmly turned and walked away, leaving the citizens to interpret the announcement themselves. But the people had no attention to spare for the soldiers. Every eye locked on the large, clean lettering of the newly posted decree. From today onward, the gates of Avildon District will remain permanently open. The gates, permanently open. For a long second, silence. Then, is this real? This has to be a joke. No, it's official print. That means... Some people even pinched each other to confirm they weren't hallucinating. The idea that the walls, symbols of safety and confinement for over a century, would now remain open was beyond comprehension. But this was no dream. It was Locke's order. Now that the route to the northern bay was secure, now that Titans could be diverted or controlled, Locke's next objective was simple. Shatter the people's fear of the world beyond the walls. Let them see the land outside with their own eyes. Let them breathe in air not trapped by stone and fear. Let curiosity become courage. And if the gate stayed open long enough, someone, anyone, would eventually take that first step. From that point on, everything would progress naturally. Of course, Locke did not intend to leave this change entirely to chance. The core members planted within the crowd had their roles to play. I mean, if the gate's staying open, clearly the Titans aren't a threat anymore. Why don't we go take a look? I've never been outside the wall in my entire life. Same here. Every time the gate opens, I only get a tiny glimpse. I want to actually see what's out there. I'm curious too. Should we go? You go ahead. I'm not risking my neck. Coward! Gradually, the first brave ones stepped forward, though in truth, they were Survey Corps soldiers posing as civilians. They walked cautiously through the massive open gate. Nothing happened. No Titans. No screams. No chaos. Just the quiet, open world beyond. Seeing this, a ripple passed through the onlookers. Then another. Soon, emboldened citizens stepped forward on their own, toes over the threshold, breaths held tight, then stepping out entirely. Curiosity won. And once it began, more followed. Human curiosity is a force as unstoppable as Titans. Outside the gates, the air felt different, wilder, wider, limitless. The land stretched far, far beyond the imagination of anyone born inside the walls. This is the outside world? It's so big. It's nothing like what I pictured. They wandered the immediate area, marveling. Though they remained close enough to retreat at any threat, awe outweighed fear. Somewhere within those widening steps lay a seed, the seed of freedom. A people who had never known the world would begin to crave it. Their minds would stretch beyond the walls that once defined their existence. And with a broader vision comes broader thought. A nation whose people can grow in understanding always has a future. Parody Island was beginning to show its potential. Meanwhile, far to the north, at the coastal bay, Locke surveyed the bustling activity from his usual perch on the cliffside. Beneath him, countless workers moved in coordinated streams, hauling timber, leveling stone, erecting frameworks for housing, storage, and the future harbor district. Compared to what the bay had been only months ago, the transformation was staggering. A wide, flattened expanse had been marked out for what would soon become Parody Island's first seaport. Surrounding it were newly built residential zones, tens of thousands of people already settled and adjusting to their new home. Beyond that, vast reclamation areas stretched inland. Farmland that had barely existed months ago now sprouted lush green across the soil. Rows of crops swayed in the coastal wind, and workers moved between them with purposeful rhythm. In a few months, the first harvest would arrive. And when that happened, the bay would become fully self-sufficient, no longer dependent on the increasingly strained supplies inside the walls. Locke exhaled slowly. Zachary should finally stop complaining about resources once these crops come in. The Treasury had been bleeding support for months. Transporting tens of thousands of settlers. Building the harbor. Erecting supply depots and barracks along the northern route. Manufacturing new equipment for expanding core units. Zachary had visited Locke several times with a dramatically thinning head of hair, lamenting budgets, shouting about overspending, declaring bankruptcy imminent. But Locke knew the stress would ease soon. His gaze shifted toward the coastline. The harbor's structure was taking shape. Even from a distance, he could see the alignment of piers, the breakwater under construction, and the network of ramps and storage areas. Skilled crews under Unyankapon's supervision worked tirelessly. 2 more months, Locke murmured. After that, the bay will be complete. Which also meant Marley's patrol ships should be arriving soon. Unlike the southern coast, the northern waters were patrolled far less frequently. The distance from the Marley mainland made regular surveillance less necessary for them. But even so, Marleyan vessels passed by every few months, and the construction of a harbor would not go unnoticed. Locke knew this. He had no intention of waiting passively to be discovered. His eyes narrowed. If you're coming, then I'll make sure you understand exactly who we are. A cold wind whipped across the cliffside, but Locke did not flinch. Below him, thousands worked to shape the future. Behind him, an island was awakening from a century of fear. The world was changing. And Locke was preparing the first message Parody Island would send to Marley. We are not preyed, we are not afraid, and we will not be stopped. Chapter 228. Off the northern coast of Parody Island, aboard a Marleyan patrol ship. Cold spray lashed against the steel hull as 2 Marleyan lieutenants leaned against the railing, bored and irritated. The sea was calm, the patrol far from the action of the Middle Eastern front, and the contempt written across their faces was unmistakable. Honestly, I don't know what the colonel is thinking, one lieutenant muttered, casting a disdainful glance toward the waters ahead. Why are we patrolling this region again? Parody Island? Those backward island devils? They can't even reach the shoreline with their primitive dirt and horses. And for a century, we've been dumping pure titans onto them. The place should be crawling with mindless monsters. The other lieutenant stifled a laugh. Keep your voice down. If the colonel hears you talking like that, you'll be mopping decks until you retire. Just think of this as a forced vacation. It's boring, but better than being shelled on the mainland. That's the problem, the first whispered sharply. If we want real military credit, if we want promotions, we need to be on a battlefield. Not wasting our time patrolling a dead island. We're Marleyan officers. If we accumulate enough merits, we can move up, maybe even enter the upper corps. He lowered his voice further. Unlike the Eldians. Those wretches can fight all they want, Marley will never give them real power. His companion shot him a warning look. Careful. Even Eldians have ears. And without their Titan abilities, Marley wouldn't be strong at all. You sound like Magath, the first scoffed. Don't tell me you started sympathizing with. A deafening whistle cut him off. Metal boots thundered across the deck as officers rushed out of the main cabin. What's going on? Did we strike something? Report! Someone give me a report. Before any explanation could come, the entire battleship lurched violently, as if gripped by an unseen force. Soldiers staggered, grabbing at the railing, others fell flat onto the deck. Brace yourselves, an officer shouted, but it was too late. A shadow rose beneath the waves. Then another. Then another. A cluster of pure titans, dozens of them, pressed up against the battleship's underside like barnacles clinging to a rock. Their distorted faces scraped against the armor plating, their fingers clawing up along the hull. The deck exploded into shouts. Why are there titans in the sea? Impossible. Titans can't swim. They're climbing up. The colonel himself burst onto the deck, breath ragged, eyes wide with disbelief. Standing at the railing, he stared down at the malformed heads bobbing in the water. This is... His words died on his tongue. Because something even bigger rose next. A massive pair of titan arms, pale, muscular, dripping seawater, shot upward from the depths, gripping both sides of the battleship as if seizing a toy. A soldier screamed. The lieutenants who had been boasting moments earlier barely had time to look horrified before. Crunchwunch. The titan's hands slammed shut. The deck buckled under the crushing force. Steel folded like paper. Nearly 1/3 of the soldiers stationed topside were instantly flattened, crushed into unrecognizable smears between fingers as large as pillars. The colonel, frozen in shock, could only whisper, "Is that the colossal titan?" He never finished the sentence. The giant hand swept across the deck, and the colonel disappeared beneath its shadow, obliterated in a heartbeat. More titans scrambled aboard, dragging themselves over the railing like nightmarish fishermen hauling their catch. They pounced on the Marleyan soldiers, tearing limbs, snapping spines, feeding without thought. The screaming didn't last long. Within minutes, the entire Marleyan patrol unit, hundreds of trained soldiers, had been annihilated. The warship, now unmanned, drifted erratically toward the coastline, pushed by sea currents and nudged by the very titans that had slaughtered its crew. On a concealed cliff overlooking the shoreline, Locke and Irwin watched the scene unfold from above, their expressions grim yet steady. "Looks like the plan was a complete success," Irwin murmured. "How ironic. Titans, the very monsters that nearly wiped out our people, are now our strongest weapon." Locke's gaze remained fixed on the drifting warship, his face unreadable. "Yes. Ironic, but also fate. Those titans were once our own people. If they must be used as weapons, at the very least, let it be for our own survival and our future." Irwin offered a faint nod of agreement. Locke exhaled slowly. "Come on. Let's get down there. Our first warship has arrived." On the beach below, soldiers of the Survey Corps stood in stunned silence as the armored ship drifted closer, guided by an obedient ring of pure titans. Dozens of troopers gathered around Locke and Irwin as they descended the cliffside path. The air buzzed with disbelief. "That ship. It's huge! Is this what the outside world uses? How does something that heavy even float? The Titans aren't attacking, they're actually following orders. Does that mean the Titans aren't a threat to us anymore?" Confusion. Awe. Fear. Hope. It swirled together like the roaring waves. Locke gave no explanations. None were needed, not yet. He simply let the sight of the colossal iron ship drifting toward their shore do the talking. Facts would reshape hearts far faster than words. The soldiers parted, giving Locke room as he stepped toward the waterline, cloak snapping behind him in the salty wind. This drifting warship would be the first naval vessel of Parody Island. The foundation of its navy. The beginning of maritime power. The Titans gave one final push, guiding the ship until its keel scraped the shallows. The metal giant settled there, towering over the beach, its hull glinting under the afternoon sun. The soldiers erupted. "Long live Parody Island! Long live Commander Locke! Long live Commander Locke!" Long live Commander Locke. Their voices thundered across the shore. Locke didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened with resolve. This warship wasn't just steel. It was a message. To Marley. To the outside world. To every soul on Parody Island. Parody would no longer be hunted. Parody would rise. Chapter 229. The ironclad hull of the Marleyan patrol ship groaned as it settled against the unfinished northern dock. The sound carried across the mist-washed bay like a dying animal exhaling its last breath. For generations, the people of the walls had feared that sound, the arrival of an enemy they could not comprehend. But now, it signaled something different. A beginning. The deck was quiet when the last plumes of smoke drifted away. Moments earlier, Locke had ordered a controlled burn at the cabin entrance. The soldiers fanned the smoke inward using broad paddles scavenged from the storage wagons, crude tools, yet effective. Within minutes, the remaining Marleyan officers and soldiers coughed their way out into the open air, collapsing to their knees before they even saw who awaited them. They were taken without resistance. The ship itself suffered no significant damage. Now it belonged to Parody. Locke had always known this moment would come. The volunteers had warned him weeks earlier that Marleyan ships passed these waters every few months, even if irregularly. Losing a patrol vessel meant the Empire would eventually investigate. The bay's secrecy was already slipping through his fingers like sand. But secrecy alone would never win this war. He leaned on the cold stone cliffside above the shore, staring down at the captured vessel. The salt wind tugged at his coat, carrying a faint scent of metal and sea brine. His expression remained calm, unreadable. Behind him, Petra Rahl, squad leader Mishi Zacharias, and Captain Erwin Smith watched him in silence. They were used to his steady demeanor by now, but the scale of his plans always left even them bracing for impact. Erwin spoke first, his voice low, as if afraid the waves might overhear. Yelena's group will arrive with more ships soon. When they notice that this patrol vessel has vanished, Marley will not send another lone ship. They will assume a breach. They will escalate. Petra folded her arms, glancing toward the dark mouth of the cabin where the Marleyan prisoners had been dragged from earlier. They will think Titans were involved. And they'd be right. Locke's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes did not leave the sea. Let them think that. It will work in our favor. Mishi adjusted his stance, long limbs planted like an idle watchtower. Work in our favor how? Fear spreads faster than truth. Once Marley believes Titans obey us, they will tread more carefully, but careful enemies hit harder when they finally strike. Locke finally turned away from the ocean and faced them fully. Careful enemies hesitate. Hesitant enemies give us time. His voice was firm, edged with strategic certainty. Marley has military power, but they fear what they cannot predict. Titans that turn away from steel ships. Titans hidden beneath the waves, a patrol fleet vanishing without warning. It disrupts their logic. It forces them into reaction, not action. Erwin exhaled slowly. And you intend to strike again while they're reacting? Locke nodded. Exactly. The wind carried his words across the cliff like an oath. The northern bay had transformed rapidly in the past 2 months. Where once there had been nothing but wandering Titans and untouched coastline, there were now a crescent-shaped settlement zone. Defensive relay towers built from reinforced timber and stone. Supply depots stocked with gas cylinders and ODM maintenance kits. Hundreds of volunteers and Survey Corps technicians are drafting industrial plans. Farmland stretching outward like a reclaimed future. But even a paradise built in paradise could become a battlefield if left unguarded. The arrival of this first ship was proof. The next arrival might be war. Locke walked along the shoreline path toward the temporary command base. The others followed. He spoke as he walked, tone practical, mind already dissecting the next phase. The harbor design plans are solid. Onyankapon's engineering team is already refining steel quality. With Yelena's formulas, we will mass-produce industrial-grade alloy in months, not years. Once we have reliable iron carbon density and tensile consistency, we can build battleships, not relics. Petra trotted her horse to match his pace. You make it sound easy. Nothing in this world is easy, Locke replied. But it is achievable. Mishi's horse snorted, sensing the shift in mood. Then the problem is manpower and defense. 70,000 civilians move north under the promise of safety. If Titans begin reappearing, or ships bombard the coast, morale cracks. Faith cracks. Government cracks. Locke did not flinch at the harsh realism. Which is why we cannot wait for them to attack first. They reached the tent-reinforced headquarters. The cloth walls snapped in the wind like sails not yet worthy of the ocean. Inside, maps and hand-drawn schematics covered every surface. Parody was learning to dream again, but dreaming alone did not forge steel. The plan to send Kenny Ackerman to Marley had originally been logistical convenience. Locke needed someone with enough brutality, stealth, and reputation to infiltrate an empire built on Titan power. But Kenny had also wanted to leave the island himself, tired of the monotony, the quiet stagnation of the walls. He wanted the outside world. The chaos. The challenge. Locke understood him more than anyone else ever could. But now Kenny was more than a soldier. He was an asset inside enemy territory. A blade embedded in the opponent's ribcage. Locke spread a map of the northern coast on the table and tapped a marked valley west of the settlement zone. If we strike Marley next, we must disrupt their internal chain of command, not their coastline patrol alone. Titans are powerful weapons, but their greatest weakness is human operators who believe they're in control. Petra and Historia entered the tent at that moment. Historia removed her cloak hood, blonde hair brushing the dim lantern light like a calm flame. Talking about Titans again? She asked lightly. Locke glanced at her briefly, but did not repeat any questions already answered in context. He already knew she supported the mission, even if she carried the weight of her father's imprisonment. We're talking about taking initiative against Marley, Locke answered. Historia sat near the map table, eyes steady. I can help. You will, Locke said, tone gentle but direct. But not on the front line. Not yet. Petra stiffened. Then who? Locke lifted his gaze toward Erwin, then Mishi, then back to the map. Me. The tent fell silent again. Even the lantern flame seemed to be still. Locke was no longer a 16-year-old squad leader scrambling to gain influence. He was the backbone of a nation now staring down the ocean with intent, not fear. He had prestige, military authority, tactical intellect, and above all, the ability to ensure the island did not collapse if he vanished for a short while. Because he had prepared successors. Because he had prepared a contingency. Because he had prepared Titans to bow to coordinates when needed. Erwin ran a hand through his hair. Locke, this is reckless. It is necessary, Locke replied immediately. Mishi leaned forward. You said earlier that a single person should not shoulder everything. Locke smirked. And I meant it. Which is why I'm only handling what only I can handle. He placed a pen on the map again and began outlining the western coastal route leading to the volunteer contact zone. His hand was steady. Precise. Fast. Every line measured not in distance but consequence. A safe passage from Wall Maria to the bay took months to build. The acceptance of the people inside the walls took generations to shatter. We cannot let Marley rebuild their logic faster than we can rebuild our future. He stood up and faced them fully, voice resonant like a commander addressing his corps. I will enter Marley to contact Kenny directly. I will coordinate with Yelena's faction from inside enemy territory. I will destabilize their belief that Titans alone can secure victory. And if necessary, I will bring the truth of Titan power crashing onto their homeland before their fleet ever reaches ours again. His words were not loud. They did not need to be. Everyone felt them. Beyond the walls, Titans did not care about blood pacts, treaties, or politics. They only cared about instinct and influence. Locke knew that if Emer Fritz's power had once enslaved the world, then the same power, when refined and wielded with intent, could liberate it or burn it to the ground. It was not noble. It was not merciful. It was not naive. It was an AR strategy. Petra rose and met his gaze, steel resolve in her eyes. We trust you. But you're not stepping inside that empire alone without support. Yelena already made her allegiance clear. Anyankopon is executing your industrial vision without hesitation. Levi and Mishi have fortified the south of the island with elite discipline. And I will make sure the inland does not crack while you're gone. Historia nodded beside her. We'll hold the island. Just as you held the truth for us. Erwin sighed again, but this time in reluctant agreement. Fine. But the moment you set foot in Marley, you stop being a commander, you become a spark. Sparks can start fires, but they can also be smothered. Do not let yourself be smothered. Locke tapped his fist lightly against his chest. I know how to burn without being burned. He mounted his horse again. The other soldiers prepared wagons in the distance, unaware that the true march had already shifted from northward settlement to preemptive warfare strategy. Locke took one last look at his companions. You defend the walls. I will breach theirs. The march out of Wall Maria was no longer symbolic. It was irreversible. The stone gate had closed behind him once, sealing the sight of his people from the Titans outside. But now, the stone gate closed for a different reason. Not to lock humans in, but to keep Titans out until Locke returned to unleash them at his command. Locke rode south toward the supply path, ODM cylinders rattling lightly behind him in the saddlebag like distant thunder. In his mind, he rehearsed not glory but sequence. Contact Kenny inside Marley. Confirm volunteer faction coordination. Disrupt Marleyan command logic. Establish internal intelligence routes. Prepare parity counteroffensive timing. Return before morale or treasury collapses. He had no illusions. Only trajectory. Only preparation. The only certainty was that the ocean was no longer a boundary, but a road. A road to war. A road to the future. A road he would carve personally. As the wind howled across the bay and the ship sat still like a conquered monument, the soldiers who witnessed this event whispered unconsciously, not out of worship, but belief. Long live parity. Long live Locke. And for the first time in generations, their voices did not tremble at the Titan shadow. Because this time, the shadow was theirs. Chapter 231. The ocean did not roar today. It claimed. Above the northern crescent bay of Parity, winter had finally loosened its grip. The sky was washed in blue, the wind carried salt and distant smoke, and on the deck of the reclaimed ironclad patrol ship, Locke stood like a man weighing history rather than watching it. Behind him, Irina, now Yelena, spoke with the same frustration she once reserved for incompetence. Locke, it's still not too late to go back now. Locke didn't turn immediately. His eyes stayed locked on the waves as if the sea itself held the answer. Then, slowly, he faced her. I can't go back. The moment I left Parity, retreat stopped being an option. I will return only after the mission is complete. Not before. Yelena sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. You're exchanging one cage for another. Only this time, the bars are farther apart. Distance between bars is what people call freedom, Locke replied. Yelena was not convinced, but she was not blind either. Marley's surveillance over subjects of Emer is suffocating. You're stepping into a furnace without knowing if you can control the fire. Locke smiled faintly, not amused, not arrogant, but sharp. Exactly why I have to go. If Marley mobilizes before we industrialize, the harbor we built will be nothing more than a gift wrapped in hesitation. I don't fight wars I don't understand. Yelena crossed her arms. So you want reconnaissance, alliances, intelligence, sabotage potential, and Kenny. Locke nodded once. That should cover most of it. And Dina? Already managing deterrence at the bay. The road remained stable because of her influence, not mine, Locke said. Yelena inhaled the sea air, heavy with resignation. I will do what I can. But your survival will depend on your own ability to blend in, judge fast, and move faster. That's enough, Locke answered. Yelena stared at him a moment longer. She did not see a reckless boy. She saw a commander too aware of his lifespan, not because he feared death, but because death feared his plans. 2. The voyage that followed was unbearably calm. No Titans, no bombardment, no political sparring. Only wooden planks under boots, slow machinery being tested below, and the kind of silence that lets a strategist hear his own heartbeat criticize him. The volunteers Yelena brought were not a battalion, they were a blueprint of a nation still denied the right to exist in their homeland. Designers, steam engineers, dock surveyors, ship welders, intelligence runners, mechanics trained under Theo Magath, Marleyan uniforms over Eldian ambition. Hundreds of them. No weapons. Only skill. And skill is a weapon when the world is built of iron. Locke leaned against the railing, cloak folded neatly behind him, as if enjoying a holiday he did not sign up for. Beside him, Yelena whispered to herself. If it were him, maybe it can work. Historia watched the horizon too. Not jealous. Not impressed. Just cataloging risk like a queen already rehearsing a coronation she never asked for. Emer, still adjusting to human form, had a quieter thought. He carries no merit badges, yet everyone salutes anyway. Because merit is louder when you have none left to prove. Locke enjoyed the calm because calm meant preparation. A nation that has seen hell can only afford peace long enough to build the weapons that make hell unnecessary the second time. 3. The wall breaks open, again, but not by Titans. While Locke crossed the sea, parody crossed itself. News moved faster than horses, faster than ODM hooks, faster than Titan footsteps, because it moved through print, rumor, ambition, and land hunger. The northern gates are open 24 hours. The ocean exists. There are other nations beyond the sea. The land outside the walls can be claimed by those who walk first. No taxes for 3 years. Houses for early settlers. Welfare for families left behind. A chance to shape a life that does not end where it began. 2 years ago, such words would have sounded like heresy. Today, they sounded like policy. And policy is belief when written by the right hand. Curiosity spread like fire that doesn't burn, it pulls. Citizens gathered not to fight Titans, but to escape the slow death of a predictable life. The North was no longer a rumor of snow and wandering Titans, it was a future without landlords. First come, first served. 4. The weight on Zachary's shoulders. At the Capitol, President Darius Zachary had aged 5 years and 5 months. The treasury emptied faster than Titans fled from Dina's influence. The port required steel they could not refine, coal shipments for steam engines they had not yet mastered, mass food supply lines, housing for families split apart by ambition, schools built overnight to educate children who might grow up on a coastline instead of farmland. It was financial warfare before military warfare. Zachary complained twice a week. Locke ignored it twice a week. Because the northward migration did not belong to emotion. It belonged to math, but not the math of numbers, the math of timing, population, deterrence, and leverage. The president was losing hair. Locke was gaining coastline. The president was losing sleep. Locke was gaining the future. Zachary muttered in his office more than once. I should have locked him underground, not roads. But even he knew the truth. Locke underground would mean parody underground. And parody underground means Marley is victorious before even attacking. Hang arrives at the future. The lab did not stay inland long. Once Hang Zoe truly touched the blueprints, steam prototypes, coal logistics, and ironwork knowledge the volunteers brought, her eyes gleamed like wildfire under lenses. We are late. Not doomed. But late. She immediately reorganized the entire steam research division and marched them north, not as soldiers, but as scientists who finally understood that ODM gear without steam refinement is bravery without output. She didn't say it aloud, but her eyes did. The Titans were never our real enemy. Ignorance was. The base station was now the heart of industrial evolution. Not a monarchy. Not the army. Not even Titans. It was infrastructure. Hang was more dangerous than Titans when excited. Because excited Titans eat humans. Excited Hang feeds a nation. 6. The Browse and Ackermans moved north. Connie Springer and Sasha Browse did not need persuasion, they needed opportunity. Families that had lost land to the monarchy's old allocation policies saw a chance to build land where land had never been claimed. Sasha's father looked at the North Coast map like a farmer seeing rain after famine. So this is what Erwin saw when he believed him. Connie was just excited. Mikasa Ackerman was just correct. I told you it was unsafe. I never said we shouldn't go. Because unsafe is not impossible. Unsafe is simply a path requiring escort, design, deterrence, and leadership. And the escort was Dina. The design was for volunteers. The leadership was Locke. The deterrence was Titans. The curiosity was humanity. 7. The Jaeger family makes a decision. In the refugee settlement outside Trost, the Jaeger family debated their slow life versus a fast, dangerous life. Carla Jaeger touched the window, staring north. Grisha once walked south to fight for the truth. Now we walk north to build one. Aaron overheard and protested, but brother dialogue was removed by rule, leaving only a stubborn boy who now carried ambition, not ideology. Mikasa shut it down with one sentence. No oceans for you until you can fight one. Armin was timid but ambitious. A dangerous combination. Timid means hesitation. Ambitious means eventual explosion. Locke had thought earlier. If he can't grow into the plot state, at least he grows into the industrial state. Either way, parity wins. 8. Locke's thought before landing. Locke stared at the waves again. If I fail, the harbor becomes Marley in wedding clothes. Then, more quietly. So I simply won't fail. Because the ocean was not an enemy. It was proof. Proof that parity is no longer a rumor in a room, it is a nation that walked out of its walls without needing to apologize for its blood. Chapter 232. The ocean arrived before the rest of the world did. Locke knew that better than anyone. But the people below the cliffs did not carry his foresight, they carried tools, timber, hunger for land, and a fear they were still learning to unlearn. Far across the winter-washed sea, the silhouettes of Marleyan patrol ships cut through the horizon like slow-moving shadows, unaware they were sailing toward a trap already set in motion. The sky was pale, iron-gray, and unkind, but the wind smelled of salt and industry, an unfamiliar scent for parity, yet one that now belonged to them. Everything was moving exactly as Locke had predicted. The night before the fleet appeared, Yelena had quietly sent a scout messenger bird to alert the harbor, confirming their timing and approach. The information network they were building was still young, fragile, and incomplete, but functional enough to tilt fate. The cliffs surrounding the bay stood high and protective, masking movement from distant lenses. It created the perfect stage, the enemy blind to the actors preparing above them, and the Survey Corps, volunteers, and Titans poised to strike without warning. It was not a noble coincidence. It was engineered hesitation. Locke, Erwin Smith, and squad leader Aluo Bozato observed from a sheltered position beneath a massive cedar, the trunk wide enough to swallow 3 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder. The cold filtered through their coats, but the tension around them was warmer than any fire. It's unfortunate, Locke said, exhaling a thin line of breath that vanished instantly, that we can't seize every ship today. Imagine how much simpler logistics would be if we stole their entire naval budget. Erwin glanced at him, arms folded, expression calm but laced with concern. Simpler logistics, yes. But unstable politics, no. If Marley loses a full squadron without explanation, they stop hesitating and start exterminating. We don't need certainty, we need delay. Locke nodded. Exactly why I scrapped the capture plan. Aluo snorted softly. You scrapped it because you trust one man to fix what 500 soldiers can't. That man is busy painting the coastline, Locke replied. Onyankopon arrived behind them at that moment, silent as snowfall, dark eyes reflecting strategy rather than reverence. You want to keep the patrol ship intact, but neutralize the soldiers, Onyankopon summarized. A calculated compromise. Locke raised a brow. You sound disappointed that I'm not ordering a massacre. I sound relieved, Onyankopon corrected. 2. The fleet slowed to a crawl as they approached the designated coordinate range. The sea beneath the bay rippled with stored Titans, 167 unsullied Titans now clustered 30 kilometers west in a controlled valley, and 45 more resting motionless beneath the waves like weapons sealed in dark storage. The first wave of Titans erupted from the seabed without warning. Iron beams groaned under strain, water exploded upward, and Marley's confidence shattered before their rifles were even fully raised. The battle that followed was swift, brutal, and non-graphic, but psychologically devastating for Marley's men. Titan arms wrapped the nearest hull, forcing the vessel to pitch violently. Steam testers and architects from Parity did not scream, they watched with a strange new normal. Titans approach, Titans turn away. Titans rise, we rise with them. But for Marleyan soldiers, it was. Titans rise, we sink. Gunfire erupted, but it was clumsy, close range, and strategically useless. Cannons meant for long-distance warfare could not be fired without destroying their own decks. Thunder spears could not be primed without blasting apart their own comrades. ODM gear was non-existent here, leaving them trapped on flat metal like insects on a tray. This was the fundamental disadvantage of a naval battlefield without mobility equipment. The strongest weapons became liabilities when distance vanished. Locke had not deployed every Titan. Only enough to demonstrate the danger without consuming their entire deterrent force. He wanted Marley to hesitate, not rage. When Petra Rahl transformed into the colossal Titan form atop a parallel cliff ridge, not to charge into battle, but to shell fleeing hulls from afar, the tide fully turned. The shockwaves of artillery fire forced the remaining Marleyan warships to scatter in panic. No detailed command was needed. Fear wrote the orders. Locke's convoy did not stay to spectate. It was not pride he wanted, it was timing. He rode toward the harbor entrance, cloak trailing like a Survey Corps standard snapping in a storm, expression calm enough to unsettle even seasoned strategists. 3. At the harbor, engineers were already positioning recovery lines to secure the patrol ship that drifted toward the shore. Workers had cleared docking space, cranes were improvised from timber and pulley engines, and garrison soldiers, no longer livestock of old policies, coordinated with precision that only centralized discipline could provide. Less than an hour later, the first ship grounded safely in the bay. Titans had vanished into deeper waters, obeying Dina's influence, leaving only debris, corpses avoided by narrative rule, and undamaged iron models to reshape Parity's future. Locke stood by the coastline, boots soaked by spray, gaze fixed not on destruction, but on leverage. A long iron ship, armor-clad, war-tested, and symbolically stolen from the strongest empire in the world, now rested before Parity's youngest commander, who was no longer 16, no longer naive, no longer dreaming. He was shaping. And shaping meant replacing fiction with inevitability. 4. The arrival of Yelena. When Locke reached the end of the jetty, the uniformed figure of Yelena stepped off her ship with the same composed stride that once led armies to cheer and enemies to shake. "It's been a while," she said, voice polite, calm, and deliberate. Locke shook her hand with an easy smile. "Still charming as ever, huh?" Petra, Emer, and Historia watched from behind, eyes narrowed like synchronized rifles. The admiration in their gazes was real, but so was their threat assessment. Emer sneezed quietly. "Tool indeed," she muttered. Petra smirked. He'd recruit Titans before recruiting common sense. Historia said nothing, but nodded in agreement anyway. Yelena didn't look at them, she looked at Locke. "I expected industrial progress," she admitted, but not transformation. You built not just a harbor, but a system. A coastline I can't measure by staring at it. Locke shrugged. Then don't stare. Walk it. She laughed despite herself. The Anyankapon's role recognized. At the shore, Anyankapon supervised the repair of damaged hulls like a conductor guiding reluctant musicians. The volunteers he had brought with him were no longer passive, they were seized by curiosity and immediately conscripted into discussions of port reconstruction, steam refinement, and naval training infrastructure. Their eyes gleamed, not at Locke, not at the ocean, but at the idea that they could rebuild a world that once hated them. It was Anyankapon who explained calmly. Parity is not a technological desert. It is simply young, eager, and under a new administration. Steam engines in half a year, seaport in 2 months, electricity next, warships later, then industry. The volunteers didn't choose to believe him, they chose to act with him, because the most powerful ally is not a promise, but a path that keeps walking even when everyone fears the terrain. 6. Locke's objective. Locke spoke again, proud but not loud. We are not descendants of demons. We are descendants of hesitation, Marley's, and our own. And hesitation can be weaponized. Yelena listened carefully, but her eyes showed admiration, not fanaticism. She didn't agree with Zeke's euthanization plan. She agreed with Locke's path: freedom, technology, population, coastline, and revenge without sacrificing the future generation. Locke didn't finish the sentence aloud, but everyone who understood the strategy could hear the implication. The future war would not be won by Titans alone, it would be won by Titan coordination, industrial deterrence, and belief that does not require sacrificing the bloodline to justify survival. 7. The war nobody declared. When Yelena spoke again, her tone was gentle, but pressured. It is easy to take you into Marley's streets, Locke. But I cannot promise you safety there, not fully. Locke smiled faintly, but his eyes were colder than winter steel. You don't need to, he said. Because once Marley stops hesitating, safety won't exist anywhere in the world anyway. That sentence was not a threat. It was a forecast. 8. Epilogue of the Harbor Era. The harbor continued its work. The bay was no longer a rumor, no longer a dream, no longer a colony in waiting. The people inside the walls had begun to whisper differently now. The ocean is real. Titans did not save us, the path did. Locke has never failed. And though Locke himself was not noble, his actions had become believable enough to move 120,000 civilians, 3,500 soldiers, 167 valley-held Titans, and an island treasury that groaned under pressure but refused to collapse. Because collapse was not allowed in a nation that finally learned to walk out of its walls. Chapter 234. Compared to the seaport nearing completion on Parity Island, the Marleyan naval port stood on an entirely different level. In scale, in engineering sophistication, in logistics, and in the dense web of supporting infrastructure surrounding it, the difference was not merely visible, it was overwhelming. So this is Marley's backbone, Locke murmured. At this moment, Locke was dressed in a standard Marleyan military uniform, standing just behind Irina on the deck of the warship. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, but his eyes missed nothing. Beside him stood Emer, wearing the same uniform. Her face remained composed, yet a subtle flicker of emotion lingered deep within her gaze. This place was not unfamiliar to her. It was, in every sense, her homeland. Marley. The land where she had been born, raised, and ultimately discarded. Though her memories here were not warm, filled, instead with hunger, humiliation, and fear, this was still the soil where her life had begun. No matter how much time passed, or how many choices she made afterward, the invisible threads binding her to this place had never fully broken. Nostalgia and resentment quailed together in her chest. Locke noticed the faint tension in her shoulders. Without a word, he reached out and gave her shoulder a gentle pat, not intrusive, not forceful. Just enough to remind her she was not alone. Emer exhaled slowly. Locke then returned his attention to the port itself. Warships of various classes lined the docks in perfect order. Cranes moved with mechanical precision. Cargo was transferred seamlessly between naval transports and armored trains that vanished into the city beyond. Soldiers moved in disciplined formations, their uniforms clean, their boots striking the ground in unison. On the surface, it was a picture of prosperity and order. A civilization at its peak. If Locke had not known what lay beneath this illusion, he might have believed it. How many people, he thought, ever realize how much blood is hidden beneath a bright facade? A faint smile touched his lips as he withdrew his gaze. Irina, who had been watching him closely, noticed the shift in his expression. "If you have something to say," Locke said casually, "you might as well say it." Her expression hardened. "Captain Locke," Irina said in a low voice, "from the moment you step onto Marleyan soil, I will no longer be able to provide you with direct protection." She paused briefly before continuing. "At best, I can assist with resources and intelligence. Beyond that, everything will depend on you and Kenny." Locke nodded, unsurprised. "I never expected more than that," he replied calmly. "Your job is to remain invisible. As long as Marley doesn't notice you, you've succeeded." His eyes sharpened slightly. "As for the rest, leave it to us. Marley won't have peace for quite some time." There was no bravado in his tone. Only certainty. Irina studied him for a moment, then nodded. Without further words, she turned and walked toward the edge of the deck as the warship slowed its approach. Locke and Emer followed a few steps behind. The massive vessel glided into the naval port, its arrival met by a contingent of Marleyan soldiers. At their front stood a man wearing the insignia of a colonel, his expression stern, his posture rigid. "Why is your ship the only one returning?" the colonel demanded. "Where is the rest of the fleet?" Irina responded without hesitation, exactly as planned. "Colonel Josie and his unit detected irregular activity in the northern waters near Parody Island," she said. "They remained behind to investigate and gather evidence. I was ordered to return with a smaller detachment to report immediately." "Irregular activity?" The colonel frowned deeply. Sensing his suspicion, Irina leaned closer and lowered her voice. "This is not the appropriate place to discuss it." The colonel's eyes flicked around the port. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Very well. Come with me." As Irina and the colonel departed for the secured port area, Locke and Emer moved according to plan. Under the guidance of a patrol unit, they exited the military zone without drawing attention. Once beyond the restricted area, there was no need for words. At the first suitable intersection, they separated cleanly from the escort, turning into a narrow side street that quickly swallowed them from sight. "The volunteers have already embedded themselves deeply within the Marleyan military," Emer whispered as they walked. "They've grown far faster than I expected." According to Irina, Locke replied quietly, "Marley has destroyed and absorbed more than a dozen nations. Every one of them has people who hate this empire." He paused. "It's only natural that such resentment would gather under a single banner. But the larger they grow, the harder it will be to control them," Emer said. "Yes," Locke agreed. "That's the risk." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I just hope they don't collapse before they become useful." Emer gave a soft hum in response. Soon, they stopped. There were no pedestrians nearby. No patrols. No witnesses. Without hesitation, Locke began removing his Marleyan uniform. From his bag, he retrieved a tailored civilian suit, dark, unremarkable, designed to blend in seamlessly. His movements were smooth and practiced. Emer followed suit, changing clothes quickly and efficiently. As she glanced sideways at Locke, her gaze paused for just a fraction of a second. "You really don't look like this most of the time," she thought. Clothed in civilian attire, his build became more apparent, lean, strong, controlled. Not excessive, but honed. Then she remembered his relentless training and the almost unreasonable amount of food he consumed daily. Of course. If someone like him didn't look like this, that would be truly unfair. They packed away their uniforms carefully, concealing them in their bags, then exited the alley as ordinary civilians. Their destination was clear. Kinney. And after that, Marley itself. As they moved through the city, Emer found herself overwhelmed. Though she had grown up in Marley, her memories belonged to another era. What now unfolded before her eyes was a transformed world. Steam-powered automobiles roared through wide streets without the need for horses. Massive trains thundered past, their whistles echoing between steel structures. Shops overflowed with foreign goods, unfamiliar foods, and people from every corner of the world. She stopped more than once, her eyes lighting up with unguarded curiosity. Locke noticed. "You're already over 60, he said dryly. "Why are you acting like a child?" Despite his words, he did not attempt to stop her. In fact, seeing her like this eased something in his chest. On Parody Island, Emer had always carried herself with arrogance and emotional distance, as if nothing in the world truly mattered to her. But here, faced with memories, contradictions, and new wonders, her defenses were slipping. She felt alive. Eventually, Emer caught the look in Locke's eyes. She straightened immediately, her expression returning to its usual calm indifference. They continued walking. After nearly an hour, the scenery changed. The bustling streets gave way to low buildings. Entertainment vanished. Noise diminished. The air grew heavier. They had arrived. The southern entrance to the Eldian containment zone. Locke slowed his pace. After adjusting the weight of several extra bags now hanging from his arm, he veered off slightly and pulled Emer into a concealed corner. Emer frowned. "When did you?" Before she could finish, a black leather bag was tossed toward her. She caught it reflexively. Then froze. "That's mine." Instinctively, she reached for her waist. The bag had been gone. "There were a lot of thieves back in the crowded district," Locke said casually. "You were distracted, so I took the liberty of retrieving it." As he spoke, his hands moved with incredible speed, opening several other bags and quickly extracting loose coins and valuables. Emer stared. "What can't you do?" Locke didn't answer. He merely tied the bag shut again, his expression unreadable, as his gaze drifted toward the looming walls of the containment zone. Beyond them lay suffering. And soon, chaos. Chapter 235. The military district lay under a dull gray sky, its wide stone roads empty and silent. This part of the city had been deliberately cleared. No civilians, no patrols passing too close. Only the echo of distant machinery and the muted hum of a city that never truly slept. In a secluded corner between two warehouse-like buildings, Zeke Yeager stood with his hands behind his back, his glasses catching a faint glint of light. His expression, usually calm and detached, betrayed a moment of genuine shock. "Locke really came here in person?" "That's right," Irina replied calmly. She stood opposite him, her posture straight, her voice steady. Compared to Zeke's brief lapse in composure, she appeared far more collected, almost relieved. Understanding his reaction, Irina continued in a serious tone. "To be honest, I didn't plan to agree at first. Bringing him to Marley carries far too much risk." But Locke was completely uncompromising. She paused briefly. To maintain cooperation, I had no choice but to accept. Zeke let out a quiet breath. "If he insisted," he said slowly, "then you really had no other option." Irina nodded. "Exactly." After a short silence, Zeke asked in a low voice, "There were no unexpected incidents along the way?" "It went smoothly," Irina answered. "Aside from the warship I returned on, every other vessel in the fleet was either sunk or captured by Parody Island." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "I also brought most of the organization's core personnel with me. With their full cooperation, the volunteers should soon enter a period of rapid expansion." There was no hiding her satisfaction. At this point, Irina was genuinely pleased with Parody Island as an ally. Its potential, military, political, and strategic, was far greater than she had initially anticipated. Zeke's brows furrowed. They can already control the power of the founding Titan? I don't know the exact extent, Irina admitted. But judging from the battle situation, controlling 40 to 50 Titans should not be a problem. Her voice remained composed, yet the memory stirred something within her. The naval battle replayed vividly in her mind. In this era, technology was advancing at a frightening pace. Cannons grew stronger, firearms more accurate, and fleets more numerous. Humanity prided itself on progress. And yet, against supernatural forces like Titans, human power still felt fragile. Even standing one's ground in the presence of Titans required extraordinary resolve. Conservative estimates suggested that nearly one-third of trained soldiers would break formation or lose combat effectiveness when faced with them directly. Once Titan numbers reached a certain scale, even the Marley Empire, boasting nearly 1 million soldiers, could not suppress them without paying an unbearable price. 40 or 50, Zeke murmured. His eyes darkened. For a fleeting moment, the image of his mother surfaced in his mind. Dina Fritz. The woman whose blood bound him to royal lineage. The woman whose fate had been sealed by this cruel world. A complex swirl of emotions rose within him, guilt, resentment, sorrow, and something dangerously close to doubt. On the surface, cooperation with Parody Island appeared mutually beneficial. Marley was their common enemy. Their goals aligned, for now. But Zeke knew better than anyone that this alliance rested on unstable ground. Even without explicit discussion, he could tell from Locke's words, his demeanor, and his unwavering resolve. Locke would never agree with the Eldian euthanasia plan. Once Marley was sufficiently weakened, once the immediate threat was removed, the contradictions between them would surface inevitably. Zeke had been asking himself the same questions again and again. Was his plan truly correct? Was it really what the Eldian people wanted? And what about Parody Island's path, Locke's vision of the future? The more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. Each time he tried to reach an answer, his thoughts dissolved into confusion. Irina noticed the change in his expression. "Are you all right?" she asked. She had always trusted Zeke, trusted his intellect, his resolve, even his madness. As one of his most devoted followers, she had committed herself to the future he described. "I'm fine," Zeke replied after a moment. "I was just thinking about something." He shifted the topic smoothly. "Given the current situation, only your ship returned. As time passes, your report to the military will inevitably be exposed." His voice grew heavier. "When that happens, you won't be able to remain in Marley." Irina had already anticipated this. "I know," she said without hesitation. "That's why this time, I'll be sending a large number of skilled individuals to Parody Island." Her tone hardened with resolve. "Soon after, I'll personally lead the team there as well. Next time, I'll bring all remaining trustworthy members of the organization with me." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "You don't plan on coming back?" "No," she said firmly. Then, after a brief pause, "Yes." A trace of madness crept into her smile. Her eyes shone with barely restrained anticipation. "I will come back. When I do," she continued softly, "it will be time to take revenge on Marley." Zeke gave a vague hum in response. He neither agreed nor disagreed. To him, Irina's hatred, her desire for revenge, even the future of the volunteers, none of it truly mattered. What he cared about was his own goal. Yet, because of Locke, that goal was no longer as firm as it once was. Irina, uninterested in his ambiguous reaction, took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed her excitement. Then she asked the question that truly mattered to her. "Didn't you go to the battlefield recently?" she asked quickly. "Why did you return so soon?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Is the outcome already decided?" She didn't even realize how tense she sounded. At this critical juncture, when Parody Island was on the verge of rapid development, a Marley empire consumed by war would be the ideal scenario. A prolonged conflict would exhaust Marley's resources, divide its attention, and by parity precious time to grow stronger. The longer the war dragged on, the better it was for the island. But if Marley withdrew from the war, it had turned its full attention back toward Parity Island. Then everything they had built would be placed in immediate danger. Once Marley discovered the island's true state, the consequences would be catastrophic. All favorable conditions would collapse overnight. This was the future Irina feared most. Because she knew she was already bound to Parity Island. And she would be for a very long time. Zeke sighed. For the first time, genuine fatigue showed on his usually composed face. Although the results haven't been officially announced, he said slowly, there likely won't be any more fighting in the near future. His words fell like lead. Soon, the Middle Eastern nations will send representatives. A ceasefire agreement will be drafted. He paused. Peace is coming. Irina's face darkened instantly. Then Parity Island will be in danger very soon, she said grimly. Zeke nodded. That's true. The situation won't be as stable as it is now. He adjusted his glasses. But it shouldn't spiral out of control immediately. After all, Parity Island holds the power of the founding Titan. His tone grew analytical. Now, aside from the Beast Titan and the Warhammer Titan, all remaining 9 Titans are in their possession. The weight of those words lingered. That level of deterrence is still significant. At least in the short term, Marley won't dare to send a massive expeditionary force. That only applies to the island itself, Irina replied coldly. Her gaze sharpened. The northern harbor will be attacked. Zeke fell silent. He knew she was right. The harbor, new, exposed, strategically vital, would become the first target. A long, heavy silence settled between them. Above, the clouds drifted slowly. And somewhere in the city, Locke had already begun to move. Chapter 236. Bang, bang, bang. Dull, heavy impacts echoed through the enclosed space, each collision sounding like fists striking solid stone. 2 figures clashed again and again, their movements fast enough to blur at the edges. Every exchange ended in a violent recoil, only for the distance between them to vanish once more in the blink of an eye. Each time they collided, the air itself seemed to compress. The onlookers standing around the perimeter couldn't help but gasp. They were all hardened fighters, men who had survived underground conflicts, assassinations, and purges within Marley itself. Yet watching this battle left them instinctively unsettled. It wasn't just strength. It was the speed, the rhythm, the terrifying precision. If any of them were to step into that exchange, even for a moment, none believed they could last 3 moves. Unbelievable. I always thought the captain was the strongest, someone whispered. But this guy, he's actually holding on. Not just holding on, another corrected, eyes wide. It looks like the young one has the upper hand. That's insane. Did you notice? A quieter voice added. From beginning to end, he's been defending. He hasn't really attacked yet. The realization sent a chill through the group. Which means he's still holding back. A murmur rippled through the gathered members. No wonder the captain acknowledges him. No wonder he admits inferiority. Across from them, standing silently near the edge of the space, Emer watched without blinking. She ignored the murmured commentary entirely. Her eyes were fixed on the 2 figures colliding at the center, Locke and Kenny Ackerman. Her expression remained calm, but inside, shock surged uncontrollably. How, she thought, disbelief tightening her chest. How can he be this strong? This wasn't just improvement. This was evolution. Compared to before, Locke had crossed another invisible boundary. His movements were sharper, his timing more refined, and his body responded as if instinct itself had been rewritten. This doesn't feel human anymore, Emer realized. Bang! Another violent clash rang out. Locke twisted mid-motion, narrowly slipping past Kenny's sweeping kick. Instead of retreating, he surged forward, his foot biting into the ground as he closed the gap instantly. His fist shot forward. The air cracked. Kenny's eyes sharpened. TCH. He abandoned the idea of trading blows head-on and leapt backward, narrowly avoiding the strike aimed straight at his face. Locke didn't pursue. He stopped where he was, straightened slowly, and looked at Kenny with calm eyes. "Do you want to keep going?" Kenny exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulder where the impact from earlier still lingered. "No," he said bluntly. "You're a damn monster." He looked at Locke as if staring at something unnatural. "It's only been a few months. I'm already no match for you." Locke shrugged slightly. "You're not bad yourself," he replied. "You managed to establish a firm foothold in Marley. And from the looks of it, you've even made a name for yourself." Kenny snorted. "Sheriff," he said with clear disdain. "No matter where you go, people are greedy. I still don't understand why so many idiots cling to rules like they're sacred." As he spoke, his gaze swept over the surrounding members of the organization. Several people shifted awkwardly. They hadn't really questioned it before, but now that Kenny said it out loud, the thought lingered. Kenny waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it." Then his lips curled into a grin. "You actually came here in person," he said, eyes gleaming. "You really live up to being my adopted kid. That takes guts." The smile faded as his expression turned serious. "I didn't come here just to admire Marley's development. I came to make sure they stop paying attention to Parody Island." His eyes darkened. "To put it simply, I want to cause chaos." "You came at the perfect time," Kenny said, smiling again. Truth be told, he was restless. During this period, aside from integrating two anti-Marley factions, his biggest achievement had been bribing his way into the position of sheriff of the Eldian internment zone. It gave him authority. It gave him leverage. But it didn't satisfy him. Now that Locke had arrived personally and made it clear he intended to stir the hornet's nest, Kenny felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. Locke raised an eyebrow. "How do you know now is the right moment?" Kenny's smile deepened. With a sharp glance, he signaled the surrounding members. Immediately, the area was cleared. Most dispersed outward, taking up concealed guard positions. Only 2 core members remained at the entrance, standing watch. Locke chuckled softly. "Being this cautious doesn't sound like you." Kenny's expression hardened. "You can't afford carelessness here," he replied. "Marley is rotten to the core, corruption, discrimination, class conflict. But when it comes to Eldians and Parody Island, they never let their guard down." His eyes narrowed. "One mistake, and not just the organization, I could be erased." Locke nodded. "You've changed." Kenny exhaled. "Once you see the world outside, change is inevitable." He glanced at Locke. "Honestly, I should thank you. You're the reason I got this chance." Then, with a familiar hint of wickedness, he added, "But don't think that means I'll be loyal to you. If I ever get the chance to surpass you, I'll take it." "There won't be such a day," Locke replied calmly. Kenny froze for a fraction of a second. Locke noticed it immediately. The fleeting sadness in his eyes. Time. Relentless and merciless. Locke was only 16, his growth had barely begun. Every year ahead of him was potential. Kenny, on the other hand, was already in his 40s. He had reached his peak. And even with Ackerman's blood flowing through his veins, decline was inevitable. Once, Kenny had placed his hopes in Titan power. Immortality. Transcendence. But reality had proven cruel. He was not like Locke. He could not inherit Titan power. He could not even become a pure Titan. With immortality denied, fear of death no longer held much sway over him. To accomplish something unforgettable within his remaining years, that was all he wanted now. And that was exactly what he was doing. "Enough," Kenny said suddenly, cutting off the unspoken thoughts. Let's talk business. He took a deep breath and looked Locke directly in the eyes. I just received confirmed information. Marley and the Middle Eastern Coalition have temporarily ceased hostilities. Locke's gaze sharpened. Soon, Kenny continued, representatives from the coalition will arrive to negotiate. A thin smile spread across his face. I think this is our opportunity. Locke nodded slowly. Agreed. What we lack right now is contact with the outside world. Interest sparked in his eyes. Then we move. When the time comes, Locke continued, Emer and I will act independently. You lead the organization and provide support. No problem, Kenny replied easily. Then his gaze shifted toward Emer, amusement dancing in his eyes. As for this little girl? Emer frowned. You don't need to worry about me, she said coldly. If necessary, I'll activate the power of the Titans. Kenny blinked. Right. He laughed softly. I forgot. That really is enviable. Humph. Emer turned away, her expression unreadable. She had never liked Kenny. And she probably never would. Chapter 237. The southeastern corner of the Eldian internment zone was a place even despair avoided. To the north of this sector stood the district's garbage processing and collection station, a sprawling, foul-smelling facility where refuse from both the internment zone and parts of the outer city was dumped, sorted, and burned. The roads leading here were broken and uneven, the infrastructure long neglected. Trade routes bypassed the area entirely, and no market stalls ever dared set foot near it. As a result, almost no one lived here. And that was precisely why it had become the ideal base of operations for the organization Kenny Ackerman had pieced together. With his recent promotion to sheriff of the Eldian internment zone, Kenny held direct authority over this forgotten corner. On paper, it was a punishment assignment, remote, undesirable, and devoid of prestige. In practice, it was a gift. Locke stood near the edge of the makeshift encampment, his gaze sweeping over the darkened surroundings. Tents and repurposed storage buildings formed a loose perimeter. Guards were stationed in overlapping sightlines, quiet but alert. He couldn't help but feel suspicious. No one wanted this place, he thought. The stench, the isolation, the decay. If no one wanted to waste time here, then of course, Kenny had acquired the position with minimal resistance. But that didn't matter. This was only a temporary foothold. They would move soon. Are you ready? Locke turned his head slightly, looking at Emer beside him. His expression was serious, stripped of its usual casualness. Emer nodded slowly. Her posture was straight, her face calm, but her eyes reflected the weight of the plan ahead. According to the intelligence Kenny had provided, a Marleyan military supply convoy would pass near the edge of the market district later that night, weapons, rations, and logistical materials, nothing irreplaceable, but valuable enough to draw attention. Their objective was simple. Intercept it. Of course, this was not something two people could accomplish alone. While Locke and Emer would handle the core action, members of the organization would provide intelligence, misdirection, and escape routes. Still, the organization's members did not fully trust them. Even though Locke had demonstrated strength surpassing Kenny's. Even though Kenny himself showed unwavering confidence in Locke and Emer. Trust, in an environment like this, was earned slowly and often paid for in blood. I don't have a problem with the operation itself, Emer said quietly. But revealing ourselves like this, is it really wise? Locke didn't hesitate. As long as we aren't caught, there's no problem, he said evenly. Do you think we'll be caught? Emer allowed herself a faint smile. Unless Kenny betrays us, she replied, it's impossible. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was a calculation. She trusted her own speed. She trusted Locke's strength even more. If it were just the two of them, Marley would find it nearly impossible to capture them, short of mobilizing an overwhelming force. And that's exactly why we're doing this, Locke continued. If we want the representatives of the Middle Eastern Coalition to consider cooperating with us, we need to demonstrate strength. His gaze sharpened. And if Kenny is to deepen his control over the internment zone, Marley's attention must be drawn elsewhere. We need chaos. Pressure. Confusion. Emer nodded. I understand. After a brief pause, she hesitated, then lowered her voice. But do you really believe Kenny can be trusted? Locke answered honestly. For now, yes. As for the future, I don't know. He had never doubted Kenny Ackerman's nature. Kenny was not a man who submitted to others. He followed his own desires. That was why Locke had never tried to bind him with loyalty. Instead, he had guided Kenny so that their goals overlapped, at least for now. At present, their interests are aligned. A fragile honeymoon period. How long it would last depended on time and ambition. Emer said nothing more. She stood up, her movements decisive. Locke followed, stepping out of the tent without further explanation. Outside, several members of the two merged organizations were already waiting. You only need to guide us to the area, Locke instructed calmly. Once we reach the perimeter, you leave immediately. The men exchanged glances, then nodded. They had no intention of objecting. In their view, sneaking into a Marleyan military supply route with only 2 people bordered on suicide. Though they despised Marley's rule and were willing to risk their lives for Eldian liberation, they were not eager to die needlessly. Under the locals' guidance, the small group moved swiftly through the internment zone. They avoided main roads, slipping through narrow alleys and neglected paths. The routes were chosen carefully, places rarely patrolled, areas the Marleyan soldiers avoided unless necessary. They drew little attention. As they moved, Locke silently observed the internment zone. Marley had herded nearly all Eldians into this massive enclosure. During the day, limited movement was permitted. At night, strict boundaries were enforced. Eldians were forbidden from entering Marleyan residential districts after dark. Violation meant severe consequences. Officially, arrest. In reality, execution. The Marleyan soldiers and officers they passed showed little overt hostility. Some ignored them entirely. Others maintained blank expressions. But eyes never lie. From the occasional glance cast their way, Locke could clearly see it. Disgust. Not fear. Not hatred born of conflict. But contempt. Even though Eldians had lived on this land for generations. Even though Eldian blood and labor had played a critical role in the rise of the Marley Empire. Racism ran deep. It was woven into the Empire's foundation. How short-sighted, Locke thought silently. If he were the ruler of Marley, he would do the opposite. He would integrate Eldians into the nation's structure. Assimilate them culturally and politically. Give them power, identity, and stake. Oppression only bred resentment. Blind suppression and indoctrination would always lead to backlash. The endless existence of Eldian restorationist movements within Marley was proof enough. People were simple. Give them dignity and opportunity, and they rarely rebel. But squeeze them without mercy. And one day, they would bite back. Lost in thought, Locke followed the organization members to their destination. Dusk had already fallen. The sky was dark gray, clouds hanging low. Lights flickered on in the distance as the Marleyan military base came into view. From where they stood, hidden among broken structures and refuse heaps, Locke could clearly see patrol routes, guard positions, and watchtower rotations. The atmosphere was lax. Years of stability had dulled the soldiers' vigilance. This was not a front line. This was not a war zone. They did not expect trouble here. That complacency created opportunity. "This is as far as we go," one of the guides whispered. "The convoy will arrive in about an hour." Locke nodded. "You're done. Leave now." The guides didn't hesitate. They vanished back into the shadows, retreating toward the internment zone. Locke and Emer remained. At night, this area was forbidden. If discovered, Eldians would not be questioned. They would be shot, or set upon by trained dogs. Marleyan officers with cruel dispositions often enjoyed enforcing such punishments. There had been incidents severe enough to cause temporary public attention, though they were quickly buried. Emer exhaled slowly. "Once we start," she said quietly, "there's no turning back." Locke's eyes remained fixed on the illuminated base ahead. That was decided the moment we stepped into Marley. Silence fell between them. In the distance, engines rumbled faintly. The convoy was coming. And with it, the first crack in Marley's carefully maintained illusion of control. Chapter 238. Night itself became Locke's ally. The moon was veiled by drifting clouds, the darkness thick enough to swallow outlines and distort distance. For Locke, this environment felt familiar, almost comforting. With a light bend at his knees, he sprang upward. His body cleared the wall in a single, fluid motion. Hands caught the edge silently, arms pulling him over with effortless control. He landed inside the base without a sound, his feet touching the ground as gently as falling ash. No alarms. No patrols. This section had been chosen carefully in advance. Locke paused for half a second, scanning his surroundings. The dim lantern light cast long shadows across the ground. No movement. No footsteps. No voices. He reached up and tapped the wall twice. A moment later, Emer appeared. She climbed swiftly, dropping down, and before she could stabilize herself, Locke caught her instinctively. His arms closed around her shoulders and back, steady and firm. For a split second, neither of them moved. "Put me down," Emer whispered sharply, keeping her voice low. In the pale moonlight, her face was unmistakably flushed. Locke, however, was already focused elsewhere. His eyes swept the surrounding area, alert for any sign of disturbance. Only after confirming there was none did he lower her gently to the ground. He turned immediately and began moving along the predetermined route. Emer followed, her expression still tight. "Marley's defenses are way too lax," she murmured after dodging another patrol with ease. "This doesn't even feel like a real military base." Locke didn't respond right away. He remained fully alert, eyes constantly adjusting, ears catching even the faintest sound. At that moment, a familiar mechanical tone echoed within his mind. Ding! The host remains highly focused and demonstrates advanced infiltration techniques. Stealth proficiency increased by 1. Locke suppressed a smile. Not a bad gain, he thought. Aloud, he said quietly, "Don't overthink it. The more relaxed Marley is, the better for us." He glanced at Emer briefly. "Our goal tonight is simple. Destroy the armory and take whatever weapons and equipment we can carry. When I need your help, don't hesitate." Emer snorted softly. "Have I ever disappointed you?" Locke paused, then answered honestly. "Not yet. I hope you keep it that way." He didn't linger. His footsteps became even lighter as he moved forward, each step placed with absolute precision. Emer noticed immediately. Earlier, he hadn't moved like this. Now, it was as if his presence itself had faded. His steps made no sound at all, like a predator gliding through tall grass. She stared at his back, stunned. Was he always capable of this? Then she shook her head. "Forget it," she muttered internally. "Comparing myself to this monster is just asking to feel useless." She quickened her pace and followed closely. After several minutes, Locke suddenly raised his hand. Emer froze instantly. Locke slipped into the shadow cast by a nearby building, his form blending into the darkness as if it belonged there. In a blink, he sprinted forward and reached the base of a watchtower. Without using any tools, he climbed straight up, fingers and toes finding purchase with terrifying efficiency. At the top, 2 Marleyan soldiers leaned against the railing, bored voices drifting down. "Guarding a tower at night is the worst," one complained. "Nothing ever happens." "Yeah," the other laughed. "Back then, a few Eldians used to sneak close out of curiosity. At least we could have some fun shooting at them. Huh. Those dogs learned their lesson. Now they don't even come near during the day. You're saying it like you didn't enjoy it. As if you didn't. Hey, speaking of money, let's hit the market tomorrow. We're short lately. We can always collect some protection fees. The first soldier turned. And froze. A shadow stood before him. Before his brain could process what he was seeing, a sharp crack echoed softly. His neck twisted at an impossible angle. The second soldier didn't even have time to gasp. Locke's hand struck cleanly, snapping bone with surgical precision. Both bodies collapsed without a sound. Trash, Locke thought coldly. He didn't waste time. Locke retrieved the rifle from the fallen soldier, propped both corpses against the railing to mimic their previous posture, and descended the tower just as silently. Emer watched from below, her eyes wide. She said nothing. Together, they moved on. One watchtower. Then another. And another. Each time, Locke repeated the same process: swift ascent, silent execution, careful placement. By the time they reached the outskirts of the armory, 7 watchtowers had gone quiet. No alarms. No suspicion. The armory loomed ahead, large, squat, heavily reinforced. 2 guards stood at the entrance. Snap. 2 precise strikes. Both men dropped before their weapons even left their shoulders. Locke gestured for Emer to remain outside. She nodded and took a position near the door. Inside, the warehouse stretched wide, nearly 1,000 square meters. Crates were stacked in orderly rows. Rifles, ammunition, explosives, and spare equipment filled the space. Several guards lay sleeping between crates. Locke didn't hesitate. He moved like a shadow through the aisles. No screams. No struggle. When he was finished, the warehouse was silent. He selected lightweight pistols and compatible ammunition, easy to carry, easy to distribute. He stacked them near the entrance, then began working methodically. The armory contained plenty of ammunition. Plenty of explosives. Creating an ignition source was effortless. Once everything was set, Locke stepped back and signaled Emer to enter. She glanced around the warehouse, then at the carefully arranged charges. "I didn't know you knew how to handle explosives," she said, impressed. Locke gave a faint smile. He pointed to the sorted weapons. "Take what we can carry. The rest, we destroy." "Understood." Emer hesitated. Her fingers tightened slightly. "Locke, once I transform here, there's no going back." Her voice was low. "For a long time after this, as long as we stay in Marley, we'll be hunted without pause." She met his eyes. "Think carefully." Locke smiled, not recklessly, but with quiet certainty. "From the moment we left Parody Island," he said, "there was no turning back." Emer stared at him. Then she laughed softly. "You really are impossible." She shook her head. "My life's probably going to be ruined by you sooner or later." Locke's gaze hardened, not with anger, but resolve. "I won't allow you to die," he said firmly, "before you witness the rise of Parody Island. Before you see the Eldians gain freedom. Before you see the Marley Empire collapse." The intensity in his eyes made Emer's breath hitch. Her face flushed again. "Then thank you," she whispered. She didn't say anything more. Emer drew a knife. She inhaled deeply. And cut her palm. For an instant. Silence. Then. Lightning tore through the night. A blinding flash erupted from the warehouse, illuminating the base like a second sun. The ground shook. The sky roared. The transformation light pierced the darkness, instantly drawing the attention of every Marleyan soldier within the base. "What? That light? A Titan? A Titan transformation inside the base? Who would dare transform here? That direction, it's the armory. Oh no, this is bad." Shouts erupted. Alarms began to blare. Soldiers scrambled from barracks, weapons half-equipped, panic spreading like wildfire. And at the heart of it all, the armory. And the Titan rising within. Chapter 239. Flames climbed into the night sky like grasping hands. Within the shattered base, alarms screamed without rhythm, their shrill echoes swallowed by explosions and collapsing structures. Smoke rolled across the ground in choking waves, illuminated by flickering firelight and the occasional muzzle flash. And towering above it all, a Titan. For the Marleyan soldiers trapped inside the base, the sight was not merely shocking. It was traumatic. For decades, Marley had lived in relative comfort. The Titans that once haunted their history had been turned into weapons, tools to be unleashed upon others. The terror had been exported. Contained. Controlled. But tonight, that illusion was gone. Watching the Titan rampage through the armory sector, Marleyan soldiers felt something long-forgotten claw its way back into their hearts. Fear. Raw, instinctive fear. Why are there Titans here? That single question echoed again and again through the chaos. It was shouted into radios. Cursed in panic. Whispered in disbelief. No one had an answer. And Locke had no intention of giving one. From the moment the explosives detonated and Ymir's Titan power was deliberately exposed, Locke had already begun withdrawing. This operation was never meant to become a prolonged engagement. He moved swiftly through the firelit corridors, two reinforced wooden crates secured across his shoulders. Inside were pistols, ammunition, and portable equipment, light enough to carry, valuable enough to matter. Behind him, structures collapsed. Ammunition cooked off violently. The armory burned like a beacon. Marleyan soldiers attempted to regroup, but panic had already taken hold. Orders overlapped. Command structures fractured. Some fired wildly into the smoke, others fled without direction. Locke encountered several patrols during his escape. None lasted long. By the time he cleared the outer perimeter, the night air felt almost quiet by comparison. Beyond the wall, Ymir was already waiting. Moments earlier, she had ended her Titan form deliberately, timing her transformation precisely to maximize destruction and confusion without lingering long enough to be surrounded. Steam still rose faintly from her skin as she stepped forward, her breathing steady. Neither of them looked back. This was never about victory in a single battle. This was a message. A reminder. To Marley. Your long, peaceful sleep is over. For a long time to come, anxiety would replace complacency. Fear would replace arrogance. Ignoring the chaos consuming the base behind them, Locke and Ymir followed the prearranged route, slipping into the darkness beyond the outer roads. They moved fast, silently, and disciplined. Before long, they reached the rendezvous point. Hidden among broken terrain and overgrown brush, Kenny Ackerman and the organization members were already waiting. Kenny straightened when he saw them emerge. As expected of you, Locke, he said with a crooked grin. You really did pull it off that easily. Locke gave a brief wave, his expression unchanged, as if the inferno in the distance had nothing to do with him. He dropped the two crates to the ground with a dull thud, nudged them forward with his foot, and pointed at the contents. This should be enough, right? Kenny glanced inside, eyes narrowing slightly before relaxing. Plenty, he replied. We're not launching a full uprising. This is just a preliminary operation. He smirked. Disposable tools. Behind him, several organization members stared at the crates with unconcealed astonishment. They had spent years scraping together weapons piece by piece, through theft, bribery, or black market deals. Never had they acquired so much equipment at once. And it had been taken from a Marleyan base. With almost insulting ease. Their gazes drifted toward Locke. And then, toward Ymir. Their expressions shifted subtly. They knew now. What they had only suspected before had become an undeniable truth. Ymir was a Titan shifter. The inheritor of the Jaw Titan. A mixture of emotions flickered through their eyes: reverence, unease, fear. For Eldians raised under Marley's indoctrination, Titan power was a paradox. They were taught to fear it, to despise it, to believe it was the curse of devils. Many Eldians in Marley internalized that hatred, even rejecting the very power that defined their blood. That kind of education left scars deeper than chains. Emer noticed their looks. She didn't react. Arms crossed over her chest, she stood calmly beside Locke, her gaze fixed only on him, completely indifferent to the thoughts of others. Seeing this, Locke abandoned the idea of saying anything reassuring. Emer didn't need comfort. Her resolve had never depended on the approval of others. Locke turned to Kenny. Based on timing, he asked calmly, the reinforcement units should be close. They are, Kenny replied. Any minute now. He gestured subtly. At once, the organization members moved. Each stepped forward, collecting a firearm and ammunition. Movements were quiet, efficient. Fear was still there, but it was buried beneath determination. They took positions along the roadside, concealed by brush and terrain. Kenny himself didn't bother with the crates. He drew 2 pistols from his coat, where he'd gotten them, no one knew, and spun them idly in his hands. Locke and Emer each carried a firearm as well. Then they waited. No one spoke. This ambush was deliberate. Destroying the armory alone was not enough to truly shake Marley. Even with a Titan transformation involved, Marley could still frame it as an isolated incident. 1 Titan. 2 infiltrators. Manageable. But if a well-armed Eldian force wiped out Marley and reinforcements? That was different. That was escalation. Not long after, footsteps and low voices drifted through the darkness. A Marleyan support unit, nearly 50 soldiers, advanced along the road, moving at speed but without full formation. Their urgency was evident, but caution was lacking. They had not yet realized they were walking into a trap. Kenny stood first. His pistols barked. Each shot was precise, lethal. In seconds, several Marleyan soldiers dropped without understanding what had hit them. Even in near darkness, Kenny's accuracy was terrifying, an unmistakable display of Ackerman instinct and experience. The organization members stared in awe. Then Locke fired. And their awe deepened. His movements were clean, efficient, utterly calm. Each shot counted. No wasted motion. No hesitation. He was not inferior to Kenny. If anything, he was colder. More controlled. The realization spread quickly. These 2 weren't merely allies of Kenny. They weren't riding his reputation. They were monsters in their own right. Emer fired only when necessary, covering angles and preventing flanking maneuvers. The Marleyan soldiers reacted too late. By the time they attempted to form a defensive line, nearly half their number was already dead or incapacitated. The fight became one-sided. Gunfire echoed briefly, then faded. At the cost of 3 casualties and 2 injuries among the organization, the Marleyan support unit was annihilated. Silence returned. Locke moved through the fallen soldiers without expression, confirming deaths and collecting usable weapons. No mercy. No hesitation. This was war. When it was finished, Kenny straightened and gave a short nod. Move, he said. There was no time to linger. More reinforcements would come. They seized what equipment they could, then vanished into the night, heading toward the next prearranged point. The killing did not stop there. Throughout the night, similar engagements unfolded. By dawn, more than 50 members of the organization had been lost. 32 confirmed dead. The cost was high, but the results were undeniable. Hundreds of Marleyan soldiers eliminated. Multiple supply routes disrupted. An armory was destroyed. A military base thrown into chaos. And most importantly, a name had begun to spread. Whispers moved through the underworld of Marley. Through hidden cells. through suppressed resistance networks. A new force was active. Bold. Organized. Unafraid. It was inevitable now. The Marleyan government would launch a thorough investigation. Security would tighten. But so would cracks appear. And from those cracks, other reactionary groups, long dormant, long isolated, would begin to reach out. The organization would grow. The fire had been lit. And it would not be extinguished easily. Far from the burning base, Locke paused briefly and glanced back toward the faint glow on the horizon. His expression remained calm. This was only the beginning. Marley had finally been reminded. Titans were not tools. And Eldians were not powerless. Chapter 240. Ministry of Defense, Marleyan Capital. The atmosphere inside the minister's office was heavy enough to suffocate. A thick carpet muffled footsteps. Heavy curtains blocked out the city beyond, sealing the room in artificial calm. At the center of it all stood Cavil, Marley's military marshal, Minister of Defense, and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. His fist slammed against the desk. "You useless bastard!" Cavil roared. "I've given you 3 days. 3 days! If you still can't capture or kill those troublemakers by then, don't bother showing your face in front of me again." Standing rigidly at attention before the desk, Major General Ross looked as though he had swallowed broken glass. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was pale, the veins in his neck taut with strain. Cavil drew in a sharp breath, forcing his temper down. After a moment, his voice lowered, still cold, but no longer explosive. "Ross," he said, "you're one of my oldest subordinates. You should understand the position I'm in." He leaned forward slightly. "The Middle Eastern delegation will arrive soon. If those reactionaries aren't eliminated before they arrive, if they manage to make contact with the delegation, then this ceases to be an internal security issue." His eyes hardened. "It becomes an international one." Ross clenched his jaw. "Marshal, I understand," he replied solemnly. "Within 3 days, I will eliminate every last one of them." Cavil studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A sharp, ruthless glint flashed through his eyes. "It's better to kill 1,000 by mistake," he said coldly, "than to let a single one slip through." "Yes, Marshal." Ross snapped, saluting sharply. He turned and moved toward the door. Before his hand could reach the handle, the door opened from the outside. A man stepped inside. He was tall and well-dressed, his posture elegant, his long golden hair tied neatly behind him. His expression was gentle, almost warm, and his eyes carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to power. With a faint smile, he spoke. "Marshal, is it truly appropriate to speak of my compatriots in such terms?" Cavil's expression darkened instantly. "Willie Tiber," he said sharply. "Stop pretending." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, what brings you here today? Aren't the women in your manor enough to keep you entertained?" Cavil had never concealed his distaste for the man standing before him. The Tiber family was the oldest noble house in the Marley Empire, their status transcending even the military and the state itself. Though Eldian blood flowed through their veins, they were treated as honored exceptions, symbols, not subjects. To Cavil, that alone made them dangerous. Someone who could betray their own people for personal survival and power was capable of betraying anyone. Willie Tiber, however, showed no sign of offense. He merely smiled and stepped forward, folding his hands politely. "I've heard that a reactionary organization has been causing considerable unrest lately," he said calmly. "Reports suggest they possess the power of the Jaw Titan." His eyes flickered briefly. "I've come on behalf of my family to express our condolences to the Ministry of Defense. If the Marshal requires assistance, the Tiber family would be willing to help." "No need," Cavil replied immediately. "We'll handle it ourselves." His tone left no room for discussion. Outwardly, the Tiber family had remained neutral for generations. They had never openly opposed Marley's rule and had even contributed greatly to the empire's founding and continued stability. And yet, those who are not of my kind will never truly share my heart. That belief ran deep within Marley's leadership. Marley had always been wary of the Tiber family. If they could abandon their own people, they could abandon Marley just as easily. Cavill's eyes sharpened slightly. The fact that Willie Tiber had mentioned the Jaw Titan so directly put him on guard. This family never acts without profit. The Tiber family already possessed the Warhammer Titan. The Jaw Titan, by rights, belonged to the Galliard family. Years ago, due to the failure of Marcel Galliard, that power had fallen into the hands of Parody Island, severely damaging the Galliard family's standing within Marley. The Tiber family had never been particularly friendly with the Galliards. And now, the Jaw Titan had appeared on the mainland. Originally, Marley intended to reclaim that power and return it to the Galliard family to stabilize internal balance. But Cavill could see it clearly. Willie Tiber had other ideas. Thinking of the influence the Tiber family had accumulated over more than a century, Cavill felt a headache forming. Even as a marshal, he could not simply crush them. The internal power structure of the Marley Empire was a delicate web, maintained through compromise, rivalry, and mutual restraint. Breaking that balance could trigger consequences far worse than the current crisis. Especially now, with the Middle Eastern coalition watching closely. Hearing Cavill's firm refusal, Willie Tiber merely nodded. "If the Marshal believes the situation is under control, we will not interfere," he said evenly. "Of course, should you require our assistance in the future, my family will not refuse." "There won't be such a day," Cavill replied with a thin smile. "In that case," Willie said gently, "I'll take my leave." He bowed slightly, every movement reflecting the refined restraint expected of an ancient noble house. Nothing appeared amiss. But the moment he turned his back, the warmth vanished from his face. His expression collapsed into something dark and cold, his eyes reflecting calculation rather than courtesy. The door closed behind him. Major General Ross, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, hesitated before speaking. "Marshal, that man." Cavill raised a hand sharply. "Enough." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do not concern yourself with him. Your only task is to capture those bastards and execute them all." "Yes, Marshal." Ross saluted and left the office, his mind already racing through plans of purges, raids, and cordons. As the door shut, Cavill leaned back and exhaled heavily. "These are troubled times," he muttered. "Let there be no more complications." He lowered his head and returned to the stack of documents on his desk. As the highest military authority in Marley, his days were relentless: briefings, orders, logistics, diplomacy. If not for the scale of the recent unrest. Thousands of soldiers were killed. 5 armories destroyed. Chaos erupting within Marley's own territory. He would never have personally involved himself. But this time, the threat was too blatant. Too bold. Too close. He had barely finished scanning the next report when a gunshot cracked through the building. Shouts erupted instantly, echoing through the corridors. Cavill's head snapped up. "What's going on?" He stood abruptly and strode toward the window. Below, in the courtyard of the Ministry of Defense, Ross staggered. A bullet tore through his head. Blood sprayed. His body collapsed without a sound. Cavill's pupils shrank violently. Before his mind could process what he was seeing, another gunshot rang out. Instinct took over. Cavill ducked. Too slow. The reinforced glass window shattered. A sharp, burning pain exploded through his shoulder. The impact hurled him backward, crashing into his desk as papers scattered into the air. The world spun. "I was shot." That was the last coherent thought Cavill had, before darkness claimed him. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 13. Peace.